Hi, this is Ronald Johnson, your life coach, mentor coach, and what I do is I help people that are tired of who they are and where they are in life.
And this is Gloria, your life coach. I help those who are feeling stuck, struggling with difficulties such as self doubt, inner judgment, lack of confidence, life transitions, and taking steps forward.
And welcome to Life's a Shuffle podcast. Now, you may wonder why it's called Life's a Shuffle, and the reason why we came up with this title is that life is really shuffling. It doesn't matter where you come from, your background, what age you are, you're shuffling multiple things in life. And the best thing to know in life is everybody faces your struggles and everybody faces what you're going through. But there's hope in learning something about that. So when our guests share their journey, the hope is you learn something in that journey so yourself can navigate the struggles you face, the low self-esteem, the self-confidence, and that's why we call podcast Life's a Shuffle.
And throughout this podcast, we share our personal overcoming stories, as well as our guests who shares their personal journey in overcoming their personal struggles. Life's a Shuffle podcast is here to connect like-minded individuals.
And thank you for listening to Life's a Shuffle podcast.
Hi, this is Gloria, life coach and meditation coach. Welcome to another episode of Life's a Shuffle.
Hi, this is Ron Johnson, life coach and mindfulness coach, and welcome to the episode of Life's a Shuffle. And today we have a special guest coming all the way from the East Coast. And she's here to share her story about who she is and what her triumphs are and how she has lived a better life for herself. So, Jessie Lucas, welcome to the Life's a Shuffle podcast. And, tell our listeners who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, hi, Gloria. Hi, Ron. Thank you. And yes, I am coming to you from New York State, and but I'm not a New Yorker. I have to kind of say that I'm a Mid-Atlantic girl. I'm from the Maryland suburbs of Washington D.C. And any Marylanders who are listening know you can take a girl out of Maryland, but you cannot take the Maryland out of a girl. We are very proud of ourselves. But so I run a business called Embodied Movement Training. In my background, I've been a yoga teacher and a personal trainer for going on 20 years. I've done some hands-on body work in there, taught lots of different things, and it's really been my only career path. I know a lot of people in the movement space kind of started as a side gig or come to it from another career, and I actually started this career as a self-care move when I was in my young 20s. I was a young mom and I started a family before I started a career. I was pregnant with my first kiddo right out of college. And I had the opportunity at that point to just be a mom, be at home with my baby, which was it was good for me. I was happy about that, but it didn't take me very long to realize that I was kind of losing myself to really entering motherhood at such a young age and not having started kind of my own adult independence or my own career. And so by the time he was probably around turning one or so, I was like, I got to do something for myself. And I had found meditation in college. I had found yoga in college. And I remember very distinctly having a conversation with a close friend of mine at the time saying, well, what can I do? Because I don't really want to leave my baby for a lot of hours. I want to be a stay at home or mostly stay at home parent, but I got to do something. And we kind of just connected the dots. And he said, well, go get your yoga teacher training. And then, if you're accountable for teaching, then you'll be accountable for your own practice. So you'll bring that back for yourself. You'll be able to get out a little bit. And I was like, that's perfect, because I was able to go teach a couple of classes a week, still mostly be home. And it did exactly that. Because, you know, I don't know if anybody's had this experience before, but when my kiddo was an infant and I'd put the baby down to try try to do my yoga practice, baby would scream, pick the baby up. Can't do my sun salutations, put the baby down, baby would scream, pick the baby up, can't do my, and I was getting really frazzled. So it was a great entry point to um, start start to bring myself back. And I loved teaching. I loved teaching yoga. I did exactly that for many years. And then fast forward a second kiddo later, I kind of had an awakening moment, realizing that the last many years were pretty dark, that I had been in an abusive marriage and it was time to go. It was really a pretty massive turning point. And so an abrupt one as well. And I found myself in a place where I needed to take care of my two kiddos all by myself and keep the house and keep food on the table. And it was around that time, I was given the opportunity to kind of inherit a personal training clientele. I lived in a small town up in the Northeast US at the time. And a, a trainer at the gym where I taught yoga was leaving, and they said, "Well, if you go get your personal training certification, we'll offer this person's clients to stay on with you." And I was not a gym junkie. I was not a fitness fanatic at the time. In fact, kind of coming from the meditation and yoga space and teaching in the gym, I looked like beyond my yoga room and I was like, I don't know what you guys are doing out there, but it looks like it hurts. It looks like it's kind of, very stressful. You guys all come into my yoga class with, imbalanced muscles and torn apart joints, and it felt very ego driven. But it was also an offer I couldn't refuse. I needed more bookable hours at the time. And that opportunity ended up being very direction changing for me, not just professionally, but personally. I found myself practicing these, what were foreign to me, uh, body practices, these fitness moves. And I remember kind of hiding in this like upstairs corner of the gym because I felt ridiculous, little like yogi me lifting weights. And so I needed to be very private about it. I was also in this really hard time in my life, and um, being kind of exposed and vulnerable. I needed a lot of kind of personal protection in space. So I was practicing these fitness moves, and I remember this one moment that things kind of just combusted. I was lifting these weights, and granted, they were not heavy. I'm a skinny little string bean, and I just had this like boom feeling of, oh my gosh, I feel strong. And that was something, we were talking before hitting record. Like, I'm tenacious, I'm stubborn, I'm gritty, I'm persistent, I persevere. I have a lot of those kind of strong qualities. But it was a time in my life I did not feel strong at all. And my personal strength, my inner strength, my sense of self worth had been, one, probably not not fully developed, as entering parenthood and a marriage at a very young age. And then what I did have was really torn apart. And even though I had been telling myself like, you're strong, you can do this, and my community was saying, oh, you're so strong, my poor little damaged brain was going, oh no, you're not. And it was replaying all of the damaging input I had taken on for those many years. But in that moment, it was coming from my body. It was coming from a physical experience that I could not deny. I feel strong. And it was like, oh, my body, my heart, my brain, everything was congruent and it was undeniable. And it was this sense of relief and ease that I had not felt in many years. And I was like, well, this is really cool, but let me go develop this part of my career so I can, keep my house, feed my kids, get this personal training gig up and running, which really went well. I ended up loving it. I ended up being able to teach people things in fitness that they weren't really learning, things I borrowed from the yoga teaching, like alignment and presence and breathing and really feeling like you're inhabiting your body. And it was well received. And I was like, oh, I can, this is, I can do this. Like fitness isn't this big, scary place. This is awesome. But I did end up eventually a few years later going back to school to get my master's degree because I wanted to study what happened in that combustion moment, that kind of, I guess I would describe it, flipping the mind body angle upside down. I wanted to know what happened when you went body mind, and not to negate the mind body angle. I just wanted to say, well, what does it look like the other way around? And really discovering how much that, yeah, how much your body can inform kind of up through your nervous system, through your emotional health, into your mental health and your neuro pathways. There's so much power behind that. So, for the last 10 years or so, that's the work I've been doing with embodied movement, kind of taking people. I created a methodology around that, kind of figured out some nuts and bolts there, and taking individual people through their own kind of transformation around that, using movement to affect and make some deep changes in how the nervous system reacts, how your emotional patterns flow, and ultimately those neuro pathways. And then most recently, the exciting thing I'm up to now is I've developed a personal or a professional training program around that to teach that methodology to wellness professionals who want to integrate somatics, who want to learn that body piece to integrate with the work that they do, like for therapists, health coaches, mindset coaches, nutritionists, that kind of thing. And that's where I am
Wow.
today.
Wow.
What a
I don't know where to
story.
start. Yeah, what a story. I appreciate you sharing your story because there's a lot of questions I have, but I want to say this. What resonated for me the most was I used to believe in one thing. I grew up fat, overweight, low self esteem, low confidence. I was in sixth grade, 11 to 12 years old, already weighing 205 pounds. I was called, my first name was Ronald, so I was called Ronald McDonald Fat Boy. And you can imagine I hated Ronald. So I would tell people call me Ronnie. So, battling weight issues and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work, I coined this phrase in my mind that if I make my body stronger, my mind would become stronger. So I spent years, I'm from, let's say, I use a point from 25 to about maybe 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, so 25 to like say 36. I spent my time focusing on my body. It means competing bodybuilding shows. That means taking steroids. That means taking weight loss pills. That means going all out because the idea is if I achieve this greatness in my body, I'll be happy. What I figured out about a year and a half ago is that I wasn't really happy because my mind wasn't powerful enough to get me to the next step, right? So when I studied psychology, I realized the conscious controls the mind controls the body. So I was so much focused on making the body strong, I wasn't happy. Like I just wasn't there. It was always defleeting. It was always not there. So what do you think about that?
Oh, Ron, I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts there. And first of all, I am so sorry that you got called that as a kid. I'll circle. I'll bring this for a circle, but full circle. But one of the things I really believe is that this. So this term I have used. I will probably use a few more times in this conversation is embodiment, and that's really what I'm going to bring it to. And what I mean by embodiment is kind of the congruence between your physical sense of self, your emotional sense of self, your psychological sense of self, maybe even your energetic or spiritual sense of self. And so, what I just heard in your story was you kind of separated out. You had this emotional impact from your experience as a kid and the name calling and anything else that might have gone on with that. That you kind of said, well, that doesn't work. So I'm going to
Mm,
turn over here to my physical sense of self because I have some control there.
mhm, mhm,
But the problem I see is that you separated them. And I think sometimes that's necessary, right? If there's a lot of damage in one category, in order to kind of get the gears turning in a positive direction, we kind of have to pull ourselves back a little bit in order to make some positive changes. So, I think that's okay. But that separation, so to put that back in through my lens, is disembodiment. You actually kind of removed yourself from your whole sense of self, because that emotional impact from all of the name calling, you're like, this is not the me I want to live. That was a disembodying experience. And what's awesome though, in what I just heard in your story, was you've been now for a year and a half or whatever, at this time of bringing it back together, this remembering. I love that word, remember, because as if we're you and I both have a background in fitness. you know these this you're the dismembering of your body, right? So like remembering, bringing these elements of yourself back together. You've had some growth, some learning along the way, and I think that's really what we all need to be given: the spaciousness, the safety, the tools, the support to do. And honestly, I think that's this is what we should be teaching to kids in school. Maybe this is what our physical education classes should include, right? Is this what is your sense of health and self? Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just being able to climb the rope, or can you reach your toes, but what languaging are we using about our bodies? How are we talking to other people about their bodies? Because those things, they put up those trauma responses, those stress responses, and those create a programming that can last for a really, really
Mm-hmm.
long time. And I look at what we can do with our physical practices. We can either, and look, this is one of the reasons I kind of had a bad perception of fitness in the beginning, is I looked at it as a place to reinforce that separation. I saw a lot of people just kind of coming to the gym to push,
Mm-hmm.
to force, that
Mm-hmm.
whole, no pain, no gain attitude. And what I ended up seeing, because I was looking through my yogi goggles, was it looked to me like people were putting up these barricades through building muscle, or through building, these fitness habits, to barricades to these other components of their whole sense of self. And I look at movement and physical movement, whatever it is, whether it's exercise, dance, the walks around your neighborhood, your posture habits at home, at work, at the car. I look at that, it can be an opportunity to put up those barricades, or to integrate all of those sense of those aspects and elements of yourself. And it could be one or the other. Sometimes we don't even know, right? We're not given the awareness that that's even a thing. We're not taught that. And then two, if we do have the awareness, we're not taught how to make that switch from reinforcing those barricades to safely dismantling them, gently dismantling them, and uh, helping that integration.
You know what? You gave a really good explanation of exactly how I feel now. I call it the path of least resistance. If I follow one path, let's say to make my mind strong, and it wasn't working or giving the satisfaction I wanted, okay, we switch gears and find another path. Let's say the path for me was fitness to make my body stronger because it will provide me a value, right? So, in the value I didn't tell earlier was that my value and my belief system was if my body looks a certain way, thus I will be able to get the car, get the money, and get the girl because
Mm.
all of those had a value to me. So my idea is okay. So this is a lever for the trigger. So let me work my body, do anything I can because then I'll be popular. Then I'll get the car. Then I'll get the girl, and thus I'll be happy. That was As simple as you get it was that thought process up until I had an awakening moment and I had a fracturing point about 2 years ago. Actually, sorry, 3 years ago, I had a fracturing point when I woke up and realized I got to do something different. This shit ain't working. And I
Hmm.
did something completely different. I really just started listening to my intuition and started listening to what I really want instead of. So it came down to this. I started realizing two things. There's a difference between being and doing, and I was doing, not being. Second thing being is that I walked through my life as though I was the effect of my reality, not the cause. So when I switched those things around, I realized, wait a minute, I'm the cause of X, Y, Z, whatever it is, and I'm going to do focus on uh, being, not doing. Life changed.
Mm.
It just overnight, just I mean, not overnight. Time does fly, but I realized that it changed for me and holistic, uh, a happy process. If that didn't happen, Life to Shuffle wouldn't be here with Gloria and I because I would still be focused on training. I would be a life coach helping clients. It just, there's always breadcrumbs along the way when you're going through a journey and restructuring. You lose friends, family members, people along the way help guide you by the words of encouragement. One guy told me, without taking risks, I've never know success. In addition, I had a client of mine that when he poured his heart out to me after winning a competition first time, I knew then, right then and there, why I never won because I wasn't supposed to be there. It energetically felt that way, and that's what happened. So, yeah, thank you for explaining it to me. And man, this is awesome. I love it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Now, you talk about like having awakening, right? So, everyone will have that kind of awakening that we all do, or maybe they will, and then that will come later on. Then, Jesse, you talked about, teaching someone to have that kind of awareness because then we end up being in that autopilot. The thought of, okay, I got to do this, I got to build muscle. And like with Ron, it's because I need to attract, it's his way of attracting women. How do you teach somebody that to let that go and have that certain awareness?
That's a really good question, Gloria. And I want to kind of make a point that those awakening moments can really th- cross a broad spectrum, everything from like a little teeny glimmer of, you know what, I just want something different, or I want to make an improvement in this kind of life, something that's a little more gentle and inspirational, all the way up to Ron, I love that term, that fracturing point of, intensity. I I've walked an intense path. I'm seeking now in my, I'm quote unquote over the hill now, and I'm seeking more gentle awakenings in this chapter of my life because the awakenings I've
Mhm.
had have been more intense. But I think that it is important to note that because it can feel very different to kind of have a kind of gentle, quiet, inspirational awakening versus an intense, possibly fracturing awakening. And when I was just listening to you and how you kind of approached that question, a quote kind of came to my mind. You guys might have heard that the body speaks in whispers before it speaks in screams. And the when I am either helping somebody kind of awaken their own awareness to these signals in their body so that they can learn to kind of access them, once they've accessed them, decode them. I think of the body's language is in sensation. So learning to awaken sensation, learning to read or decode that language of sensation, and then learning to respond accurately or in alignment with that sensation. And something that happens when you are kind of on the more intense end of the spectrum, moving towards a breaking point or a fracturing point, you can desensitize. If you are, especially if you are dealing with trauma or an intense stress response, Your biology is meant to draw your attention away from anything that's not necessary to in order to promote your either just protection or survival. So I say that because I know in the beginning of my own kind of reawakening and teaching myself that level of awareness, I felt a lot of regret and guilt that why didn't I see this before? Why didn't I feel this before? Why didn't I respond better earlier? And now that I'm a little further out and because I'm a nerd and have studied this big time, I kind of know the inner workings of this, but that's just how it goes. And so one of the ways I teach that is to first kind of do some nervous system regulation. You can't have access to the awareness of the wisdom of your body and read those signals to be able to respond in alignment with them if you are just freaking out. If you are, if you have your guards up, or if you have all of your protective barriers up. And sometimes those are in place for a reason. Those are in place because you are in a situation that is not right for you. And it could be anything as like, I'm just in the wrong job for a long time, or I've been listening to a negative boss for a long time, or everything to something that's really detrimental and damaging, or something that's just like, oh, I don't feel like me. It could look a lot of different ways. So the first thing is in teaching that is to really create the body as an environment where these signals can light up. I can picture it like a switchboard lighting up. So that would be things like, one of my favorite tools is breath work, because it's I look at breath as kind of the bridge between your physical sense of self and your mental and emotional sense of self. Because think about it, when you're every emotion kind of has its own breath. If you are laughing and joyful, that has its own breath that goes with it. If something startles you and you're afraid, that gasp and kind of a shortness of breath. If you are in a deeply pleasurable moment, that long, slow, drawn out breath. So and breath is something you can control. So it's something that kind of happens to you. If a situation changes your state, your breath will be one of the first things to change. But kind of like when I said in the beginning, what happens when you flip that body to mind thing upside down, you can change your breath to change your state. So that's the first thing I started really doing when I realized I was stuck in survival mode, when I was stuck in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint mode. Is thank goodness I had my yoga training. I was like, there's a lot I felt like I couldn't do. What can I do? I can intentionally breathe. And even if it was for very short amounts of time in the beginning, because I was afraid and I was really, really stuck in that mode. So sometimes, in teaching other people to do that, it's just the little teeny tiny bits you can do. And just like you can train a muscle to be stronger, you can train your nervous system to respond to these breaths that correlate with regulation, that correlate with calm. And when you can do that, you then light up that switchboard. You then gain access to this body wisdom, and then are able to kind of get that information that allows you to make those integrative moves, like and like Ron said, like, oh, this isn't working. Like my mental strength and my physical strength, these are not coordinating here. And that's a way you can kind of find where the things that aren't coordinating, where the gaps are, and start to bring them together.
So it's just really, this is really more like, I'm thinking about this. It's just connecting your mind and your body. You find that, way or that path, how to connect both.
Yeah, I heard a friend of mine describe it this way recently, and since then I've been using this. But using a lot of people, when you're thinking of connecting mind and body, we are coming off, being in this field for a long time, we're coming off a generation of mindfulness. Mindfulness maybe 10, 20 years ago was a newer, less used term. Some weirdos like me found meditation in college, or, it was, but now we see mindfulness everywhere. We have mindfulness challenges from Oprah and Deepak Chopra. We have mindfulness in the schools. I have one of my younger son is in high school, and when they went to hybrid education last year, when the schools closed, there was a meeting with the teachers, and I think it was the English teacher said, if you see your kids sitting in front of their Chromebook with their eyes closed, don't automatically assume that they're sleeping through class. I do a mindfulness moment at the beginning of every class, and we do a little, check in. And so mindfulness, a lot of times when we think about connecting the mind and body, we think about it because this has been the conversation for the last many years of coming in through the mind. So what I'm offering here is, yes, and what if the body, what sometimes happens when you come in through that mindfulness, like I looked at coming in through my mindfulness and I was thinking, okay, I know how to meditate. I know how to think positively. I know how to keep planning and putting one foot in front of the other. But my body was operating in survival mode. My nervous system was freaking out, and it was not allowing me to feel calm and to feel safe. And I couldn't flip that switch with my mindfulness techniques. I just couldn't. My brain, my neural pathways were stuck. They were just stuck. And those mindfulness skills weren't budging them. So this conversation is really just about coming in from the other angle, coming in through the body angle to do that. Yes, it is, to your point, connecting the mind and body. It's just opening up, turning the arrow the other direction and opening up that pathway as a possibility. So using movement, using physical skills to change those neural pathways, to connect the mind and body, but from the body pathway.
Wow.
I like that. I like
I
that
like it
because
too.
we're so yeah, I think what we know is we only know one or the other, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so
Right.
we only know mindfulness, we focus on just mindfulness, so we meditate. Then we know physical, so we focus on working out, focus on just anything physical in our body. But we never really think about how do you connect both and how do you do both at the same time? Or how is both connected?
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
it's really beautiful when you do, that's where I see that's embodiment. That's our whole sense of self. And, you know, working with mindfulness, we've discovered, oh my gosh, our body stores our history.
Hmm.
Working with mindfulness, we've kind of shown the flashlight into this inner world of somatics, and where how the body responds to trauma, how the body stores emotional stories. And so it really is, I think a term I keep saying is embodiment is the new mindfulness.
Hmm.
And it really gives me so much excitement and enthusiasm and hope, and just that it's wonderful to see people. It's a relief, it's refreshing to say, oh gosh, all of this mindfulness, because mindfulness training can be hard and arduous. And when you connect the dots and add in this embodiment piece, it almost like activates it and puts it in action and brings those pieces together. You know, Ron, what you said, the being and doing, it becomes not either or, but both
Hmm.
together.
Hmm.
You talked about as a yoga instructor, and I do yoga, and I think I've discussed this with you how I do Bikram yoga. A lot of the people I've heard are there for mindfulness, and a lot they're there to for injuries, prevent injuries or whatever previous injuries that they've had. Now I go and I'm thinking about it, and I go there in the beginning when I first started Bikram yoga. It's because of my injuries, and I've heard about it, and I said, let me try that, and I've had and seen the difference without having to do surgery. I've gone through um, without having to do surgery on my knee. I was able to go back into my regular activities with the help of Bikram yoga and other strengthening that I had to do. Now, would you say wouldn't yoga be not only physical and also mindfulness when you're in there?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that that's what allowed me to see fitness the way that I saw it in the beginning, because I came in from that yoga approach. As I first learned yoga myself as a student and then as an instructor, and I have seen that time and time again in the yoga room, where whatever got the person in there, whether it was, oh, I've heard stretching is good, or I need to de-stress, or I I have this injury and somebody said, yoga's a good idea. Whatever got you in the door, if it is done well, and all the different lineages or types of yoga out there, if it is done well, then it is absolutely the potential to create that environment where the embodiment and the mindfulness can come together. I think that having that experience is what gave me the perspective that that's a possibility. And with with the work that I do in embodied movement, my suggestion is that you can create that kind of combination in any type of movement.
Mhm. So I'm listening to your story, and I have two questions. First, I want to know what was your fracturing point? And in my field, I do a lot of engineers, and a lot of people like the old saying is, if I see it, seeing is believing. So if it's tangible, they can see it and believe it. So how would you tell someone that has that mindset of seeing is believing to merge them two together without giving them two tangible items in their hand?
Uh, so, I mean, for me personally, my fracturing point, I had a moment. My youngest son, my kids are about 5 years apart. My youngest son was less than a year old,
Mhm.
and a series of events had been going on, really kind of painful, scary things, and they were kind of increasing in frequency, increasing in intensity, and so I was kind of on high alert of recognizing that the situation that I had been able to kind of grit my way through was different. I started recognizing, kind of like I think this is very primal, right? My two little kids, one of them was a baby, and I'm like looking around, like the scene is not safe, kind of thing. And there was one of those moments where there was an incident in my home that was very unsafe, and it tipped my scales, and I left my house and I walked away with my 5-year old and my baby. And I said, I'm not coming back until you are gone. And it was just this kind of point of no return feeling inside of, I have been tested to the max. There is nowhere else to go. There are no other fragments left to explore except a complete turn of this situation. So I would say my fracturing moment in that case was very primal. I'm going to add a second part because I think these are kind of two bookends. I think that that started me into a holding pattern of sorts where I had fractured into enough pieces that when I looked at all of the pieces, every single one of them was broken way too small except one, and that one was get the hell out. So I picked up that one piece and got the hell out. But that put me then in a holding pattern of that was all I could do, just get through the next day and the next day and the next day. And there was kind of a coming together point, and this is a little less pinpointed, but if you're looking at kind of the two tangible things, right, that was very vivid to me when you put it together that way. I think for some people, fracturing moments are complex. They're not necessarily kind of one pointed. And there was another kind of less pinpointed point where I realized, okay, I have to this one shard that I left with is not sustainable to live on long
Mm.
term. And I need to rebuild. And those other pieces are too shattered. I cannot use them. And so I had to start to look around at what I could pull from. And so I consider this a fracturing moment as well because I had kind of gained enough space from that initial kind of more traumatic fracturing moment where all I could do was pick up that one shard that said, get the hell out and go. Now I had a little bit more bandwidth to kind of look around and see, okay, the coast is clear. And I don't know what the timeline was from that first moment, but let's say at least 6 months or so, I'm guessing, and enough bandwidth to look around and say, oh, it's a little calmer now. The danger has passed, but things are really broken. I can't go on this one shard because like running on fumes. This is not going to work. What can I rebuild with? And I started looking at what was working, and maybe it's my nature, maybe it's my training, but I started looking around and I found my health habits.
Mm.
I found hydration. I found nutrition. I lived up on a mountain at that time. I found like grounding, like putting my feet on the earth. I found different techniques of one was just really looking on purpose for beautiful things, simple things like the way the sunlight came in through the window or the particular color of a flower or a raindrop on a piece of grass, like very simple things. And like when I would notice them, I would make myself linger on that
Mm.
for a moment. And so I started finding all of these pieces. So it was still fracturing because they were all still pieces, but it was a point where I started to be able to kind of notice pieces that I could start putting together to rebuild.
Wow. So
That's
essentially,
beautiful.
yeah, and it's powerful too because essentially is human nature fight or flight. So obviously, some situation you went through, you had to say, "I got to get the heck out of here." And then it's apparent that the way to put yourself back together is to connect with your environment.
Hmm.
So as you tend to, um, let's say, as you tend to give out to others, or you tend to go through these moments that are traumatic, let's say events, it's important to get back to basics. Run your feet through grass, smelling the fresh air, maybe hiking, drinking water, so that way you can probably bring the pieces back together and see how to move forward. Because as you say, you're in a holding pattern, like what to do, where to go, what's the best option, right?
Hmm.
Or let me ask you this: what is in your definition of a holding pattern?
Um, I look at it as a very both physical and psychological thing where because I this is how I look at these things. So neurons that fire together wire together. When you have a pattern, whether it is a thought pattern, a life pattern, we are as humans created to run on habits. Otherwise, if I reach out to pick up my glass of water, if I had to think about every little step, like, okay, core has to engage to keep my trunk stable, tricep has to engage to extend my arm, forearm muscles have to engage to grip the glass, like that all happens below my level of consciousness. So I look at a holding pattern as you have had something impact and your way of being to create a pattern, and that pattern then sinks below your level of consciousness. So if I want to change the holding pattern, I have to bring it up to my level of consciousness. That's where changes can be made. But I think a holding pattern, whether that is your thinking patterns, the being and doing, let's just bring it back to that, whether it is a being pattern or a doing pattern, it is something that has been informed by either a chronic situation or an intense situation, created a set of habits in being and doing, and has sunk below your level of consciousness. So it just happens. Gloria, like you said, running on autopilot.
Wow. So it's basically just getting back to basics and figure out the steps, bring it to your higher level of conscious or awareness, and so that we can proceed forward.
Yeah, and your nervous system is really cool because it has these kind of switch tracks
Mm-hmm.
where you can take something that has sunk below the level of your conscious awareness and bring it up. And I mean, you can like trace like the pathways that that your nervous system fires will alter. You can bring it up to the level of consciousness where you can change the pattern, and then once that new pattern has established, it will sink again below the level of conscious awareness. That's a switch track that you have control over. And that's where creating an environment where that can happen becomes key. So, those back to basics things, or like Gloria, what you experienced in the Bikram yoga class. Like there are lots of different ways to create that environment so that you can find that juncture, so that you can cross things above and below that level of consciousness to change them.
Yeah, so it's more of like connecting to your highest self as well.
Mm-hmm.
How was that? What does that feel like for you to be connected to your highest self?
Oh, I'm still working on it. I feel like, so I right now, as we're recording this, I'm 43, and I asked me that in a few years because I feel like I'm finally just at that point where I'm like, oh wow, all right, my 20s, this went down that path. A lot of this was the story of my 20s. My 30s was really about getting my feet back on the ground, living into that that stability that I created, but not really flourishing, I guess. Like I was good. I was good, but still really like doing the do. Like just
Hmm.
in that rebuilding phase. And now in my 40s, I think that's the question.
Mm-hmm.
That's the journey right now, the inquiry that I'm on, the I think that's exactly what I bring up to my level of consciousness is, okay, now that I've done this part and that part and this other part, I think I've got the ingredients to live into my higher self. And I'm sure I borrowed some intelligence. I'm sure that my higher self was like, oh, little Jessie, get up. Like it was probably the thing that when I woke up that day and said, get the hell out, that was probably a message from my higher self, right? Some of these pieces, when I was able to look around and finally like see the beauty of something in nature instead of really being stressed out and afraid, like that was probably a little a little poke, a little nudge from my higher self. The inspiration to go study this stuff. This feels like a calling for me. This feels like purpose work for me. I feel so blessed to have my work be an integration of both personal and professional. I don't know what it is to separate
Hmm.
those things, to go to a job that I'm not aligned with and then come home and then that's where I'm myself. All of these things I think are influences from my higher self. And I can tell you, I'm really excited about this decade and beyond to really figure out the answer to that question. So we'll have to do another recording in a few years, and we can
I,
start with
Yeah,
that
of
question.
course we
I
will. Of
think we do.
course. I
Yeah.
think we should. And I love that. I love the feeling of when you feel like you have that calling and you feel like this is a calling, or the thought of, what is this? What does this mean? I think this is it. I think this is a calling. And you just kind of move forward and you go and pursue that. Once you
Hmm.
do, it just kind of, everything just kind of falls in place, and what was, if any message you received from this?
I eh, that's another really good question, and I think the biggest thing that I kind of surround this whole conversation with, and the thing I really want to make sure I kind of leave with here, and one of my biggest messages is where I really believe as humans on this healing journey, this growth journey, we are not meant to do it alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are coming off, just like we're coming off of a generation of learning mindfulness. I also see that we are coming off of a generation of self-care, self-empowerment, individual, self-awareness. And I think that's an essential component. A lot of us, myself included, lost our sense of selves. We lost that piece. We are either givers, or we've given into, like Ron, you said, like the idea of like, get the car, get the girl, like we've
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
lost that inner sense of self. But I truly believe that the smallest component of health is is togetherness,
Mm-hmm.
and that growth journey, the healing journey, is not an individual journey. It has an individual component for sure. um, but when for myself, the one of the biggest things that I had the hardest time leaning into, and I see a lot in my communities, is when you're so stuck on this, I gotta fix myself, I gotta heal myself, I gotta change something about myself. You lose that interconnection with others, and especially if a connection with others helped influence that needing to retreat within, if there was some sort of traumatic situation brought on by another person or group of people, that that can influence a lack of trust, a lack of opening up, a lack of vulnerability, which is completely understandable. But I think that, my hope is that the way that coaching, that healthcare, that the healing arts, that communities in general can improve is in this sense of togetherness. I want there to be not just a self-help section, but a help each other section
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
in the bookstores, in our
I agree.
in the all of that. So I think that's one of my biggest lessons, and my biggest inspirations. Like, if I could shout something from the rooftops right now, it's that, is that we've got to be in this together, and that healing and growing is not meant to be done alone.
Mm.
Yes, exactly. And that's what we're here for. That's what this podcast is about as well.
Yes.
Hmm.
I read this book. Listened to this book when I was listening on Audibles, and it's by five different people. It's by Earl Nightingale. It was Jim Roman's in there. Tony Robbins was in there. It's like 3 hour long book. And one author said, everybody in this universe, in the world, has think of an orchestra. You got a banjo, you got a flute, you got whatever it is. Everybody needs to play their own drum. And obviously in the orchestra, everybody plays their own drum because it brings everybody together. And no one does nothing alone. You can't have an orchestra or event, an opera show, without everybody helping each other out, right? This person's good at singing. This person's good at propping, whatever it may be. We collectively need to work together. Instead, collectively, we learn how to be separate. So while we intentionally pursue happiness or pursue success or whatever it is, we think it's all individual. You know, easy example is a person has a master's degree. The kindergarten teacher had to teach him how to do, how to teach him how to color, right? So they didn't do that alone. They wouldn't know how to color. Some teacher in second grade had to teach them 2 plus 2, whatever it is. So no one does nothing alone, but we think we're alone, but we're not. And also hearing your story, Jesse, too, is the last little piece. Because for me, as I'm getting older, I just turned 38 last month. I'm picking up speed. I'm like the NASCAR. Not a little funny car that back up and now it goes red, green, red, yellow, green, hit the gas and then fly down the straightaway. That's me. I'm picking up speed.
Hmm.
So what I want to actually get to the point is that we have to give ourselves permission to be us, but be you, or be an individual, or not individual, but permission to be who you are, rather than just using outside sources to define who you are, become your identity. Because what happens when you go to a fracturing point, you're realizing, wait a minute, I was known as this, whatever the identity is. Now I'm going to create a new one. How do I do it? And I have my certain environment, circumstances. Can I do it? So giving ourselves permission. And like you said, get that bookstore or Amazon, whatever it is, and create the icon that says, bring us together and how. I might write a book on
Yes.
that.
Yes, because I think that's the only way we will truly have permission. Like if it's just little old me in a vacuum going like, okay, I I can do this. I have permission to be me, but then you walk out the door and the whole world is going, "Oh, but not that way.
Oh, not that way. It's
But
this
not
way.
that way. But not
Exactly.
And
that."
that's that, and
Right?
that's
So,
when you start looking down and looking down at yourself,
And you don't move.
yes.
You don't move
and you
forward.
don't
You
do
end
Yes.
it.
up
Yeah,
you end up going back into your comfort zone because someone said no. But
Right.
that person that said no has no idea your journey, your path, your direction, what you want to do. And then more importantly, we get learned how to ask more questions.
Mhm.
Don't
just be
mind me and
curious of
don't assume.
others, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Be more curious of other people. Be more curious of me. Ask me questions. Don't judge.
Yes.
Yes.
So one thing, Jesse, as we get ready to end our podcast, I mean, time flies. What is I always ask clients at the not clients, sorry. I work full time as a coach. I always work clients, our guests. We always ask our guests, what is one thing, be 1 to 3 sentences long, that someone can have as a big takeaway from you?
All right. First of all, I love you. I love I think, we don't hear that enough. Thank you, and I love you, and say that to somebody today. Um, and say that to yourself, even if that's goofy. So first of all, just love. I just want to surround this whole conversation in love, and to take love away. It's hard times right now, and we just let's put that little dose in your love tank. But the actionable takeaway I will leave with is just know that your body is wise. Know that sometimes the signals can go haywire. Sometimes your body is operating on old stories.
Mm,
It can be shifted. It can happen gently. It can happen powerfully, but your body is wise.
I love that.
I
Thank you so
love that.
much.
I'm gonna write it down right
Yeah.
now. How to operate on new stories. Oh, awesome.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Jesse. And I really, really appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you guys for holding these conversations and broadcasting this message, and for all that you do. We need more of this. I appreciate you guys.
I appreciate you. So
Thank
I want to
you.
say thanks, Jesse, for being a guest. And for our listeners out there listening to podcasts, Jesse, where can they find you if they want to connect with you?
Absolutely. Embodiedmovementtraining.com is my website. It's a long URL, embodiedmovementtraining.com. And you will see all of my goodies there. And there's a contact form. I love hearing other people's stories. So please, I read every single email individually. I would love to hear from you if you heard something that really stood out. I would love to hear what that is. So embodiedmovementtraining.com.
Awesome. We better connect her. So, guys, you know where to find her, you know where to connect, and she reads every single story. So it's not a bot responding or some virtual assistant. It's Jessie responding to your story. So connect with real, authentic people.
Yes.
Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Life's a Shuffle. This is Ron Johnson, your life coach and mindset coach.
Yes, and again, thanks, Jessie, for joining us today and just for sharing your story. And we appreciate you. And again, thank you for listening to another episode of Life's a Shuffle. And just one last thing, just be about love and be love.